mics are not hot. Thank you.
I bet I can. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I want to introduce Laura Limbal, one of our very important funders from Firelight Media, the director of the Producers Lab, and she is going to be doing our Q&A. Before we start the Q&A, I just want to recognize some people from our team. If you can just stand in your seats if I call your name, please. Our brilliant producer, Jessica Devaney. Our co-producer, Gloria English, our associate producer. Our brilliant executive producers, Dan Kogan and Jenny Raskin, Daniel Chalfin, Jay Spears and Debbie McCoy. My family, my mother, Tribeca Boundaoui. My sisters, Iman and Naha, and my brothers, Usama and Dave.
Good evening, everyone. Can we get a round of applause? Another round of applause for this amazing family. Wow. Where to begin? So amazing, and it's a real pleasure and an honor to be sitting up here with you all. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I have to say, Mrs. Boundaoui, that I'm in total fangirl moment here, so I'm going to try to contain myself and act appropriately and professionally, but it might be difficult, so please bear with me. So maybe I just want to start with making a personal film is always difficult. It's notoriously difficult, but it seems to me that when the stakes are this high, it would be another level of a challenge. And so I'm wondering, for the family, what did you all think when Assia first came to you all with this request? And I actually want the person who was the most hesitant to answer first. Who had the most sort of hesitation and concern? Oldest brother, where are you? See, he's hiding. So yeah, the question is, just if you could think back, what went through your mind when Assia first approached you with this idea?
We all thought she was a little, very courageous, but a little crazy. No, honestly, the running joke is that I was hesitant. We were not really hesitant. We knew, everything we knew about Assia from when she was like 10 years old really led up to that moment. It was not a surprise that she would be the person that would take such an endeavor. So there was really no surprise. And we knew what was going on in the community, and that there was someone bound to look into this, and it was going to be Assia. It was the most natural thing.
So for me, I don't think it really registered what Assia was doing until the camera came into the home. I think that's when I really started to think critically about the project and what it might mean. And for me, on a personal level, the juxtaposition between a film that, really looks critically at what it feels to be watched is really interesting, because we were being watched by the camera itself. And so it suddenly, for me, felt like brought back the feeling when we were little children, that someone's watching us, because right now there's a camera in the home, and you almost remember, and you're forced to face and deal with what that feels like on a sort of more intimate, personal level. So that was interesting for me. It was like making a film about being watched, and we're criticizing, that aspect of it, but it requires us being watched in our daily lives. So it was like, it was such an odd feeling to sort of grapple with. And we all sort of had our moments of like, does the camera really have to be here when we're eating dinner? At the birthday party, we're roller skating, like, really, Assia? But like now, right, it all comes together, and you realize like that actually on a deep level was something that we have to face as part of this project. So that's how I feel.
I just want to add that they whispered all the time in front of the camera, and I'm like, and my mom especially would whisper in Arabic all the time, like, Mom, the editor speaks Arabic, and I speak Arabic, like, we're making the film. So we're gonna understand what he's saying. But it was just like a natural thing, because we grew up whispering about certain things, on the phone. My mom would say, I'm not talking about this on the phone right now, we need to talk in person, about a lot of things, and it was natural to whisper, and so they did that a lot in front of the camera, and it was hilarious, because it was like, we understand Arabic.
What was your sort of your first thoughts, if you can recall, when Assia first approached you all with this idea?
It wasn't like Usama said. It wasn't like, I think she was the one who would do that. I think many things happened in our community, especially in between friends. We had like a family friend who had been under this, had been watched, and a lot of problems about that. So I think we were very attached to these families. So it was just about time to do that. And Assia, I think he had been very emotional about what's going on in his family and all these problems, and that's why I think she had the courage to start doing that, and said, yeah, it's just about time. That's it, it's enough to hide all these things and just, like they said, whispering in the phone. That's it, in the camera.
So, all right, so everyone agrees, okay, we're making this film as a family, and then, but you're making a film about surveillance, and then it starts to become clear that you all are under surveillance, and that the surveillance is increasing, right? So there's the road bump, that the speed bump that gets placed, that gets put in, then there's Robert Wright, then there's, now we're suing the FBI. It seems like along the film, the ante is just increasing. How did you all deal with that? How did you all navigate that?
So when I heard that Robert Wright came to our house, I wasn't living in Chicago, and I think it was really hard to think about. Like, the movie is empowering, and Assia doing all of this, and the community was behind her, but the fact that something that we thought kind of past was so real and happening now was just a shock. It was offensive. And to think that he had the audacity and the chutzpah to come to our neighborhood and talk about our neighbors like he used to barbecue with us. We're not friends, we don't like you. And to think that he felt He had the authority to come to our neighborhood and walk to my mom's house where my niece and nephew would run around in their front yard. Like, it was all so real. And that's why that night when Assia called me saying this happened, I'm like, okay, Amazon, surveillance camera, we need this now. And I literally bought it 5 minutes after talking to her. So it was hard because the movie is so empowering and her investigation was incredible and the whole community is behind her. But the fact that it just got thrown in our face again was difficult.
It was a difficult moment. In fact, we had like pretty much wrapped production. We were well into the edit of the film. We were dealing with archival footage of this guy, and it felt like the villain from the film just like walked off of the screen and into our real lives. And at that point, you know, I started making the film, and we weren't in it. It wasn't personal. I was behind the camera. I was doing it as a journalist, and it took 2 years for me to realize that actually the film is about a process, and we need to show the process, and that means I need to be in it. And that was a very, very difficult decision to do. I think one of the consequences of being under surveillance for such a long time is that you become a hyper-private person, you know, because you're holding on to whatever privacy you have left. And our whole family is like that. We're very private, so it was very difficult to pull myself in front of the camera and be vulnerable or bring the camera into the house and all of that. And so when that happened, it was like, you know, just a clashing of worlds. Like, was this the right decision to open ourselves up to this? But a lot of the people we filmed with, while we were filming with them in the beginning, before I came in front of the camera, we were filming with folks that were getting more and more visits from the FBI. And folks were dropping out of the film because they thought they were getting more heat because they were being interviewed. And so there were people that I filmed with for more than a year that at a certain point decided, like, we don't want to be a part of this anymore. We just want to protect our families. This is getting way too personal. We don't know if it's related to what you're doing, but like, we want to take a step back. So I realized I was asking a lot from people, and I needed to ask that of myself. So if I'm going to ask something from somebody else, I need to be able to do that. And that was really hard. And in fact, that changed my idea as a filmmaker and as a journalist. Like, you're asking people to talk about the most traumatic times in their life, but hang on, we got to get the sound right. And wait, let's get the light, let's fix the camera. Okay, go again. You know, it's really a lot to ask from people, and it was an incredible lesson to put myself and my family in front of the lens and to see that firsthand. But when that happened, it was like, oh, okay, this is what people were feeling when they, you know, when that happened to them. And that was very difficult. Like, did I just endanger my family? Did I make it worse? You know, and nobody really blamed me for anything yet, but
She looks around.
yeah, but it was difficult.
I actually want to ask Mrs. Boundaoui, and I saw babies and children around, so who are the parents here? That's
My
you.
brother's kids.
Yeah, so I'm a mom. I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and you know, in my space and in my community, we're talking a lot about the conversation, right, that you have with your Black children about the police, especially if you have Black boys. I have a son as well as a daughter, and he's 7, and I've already had to begin the conversation, not because I wanted to, but because of things that he's been exposed to. And watching the film, it occurred to me, you know, watching you, Mrs. Boundaoui, and your story, everything that your family has gone through, and then seeing your children on screen, you know, the difficulty of, you as a parent, it's already hard to try to raise children to be, you know, sort of kind, decent, good people. That's the standard, that's what we all want. But when they're up against a society that it seems like is doing everything that will make them fail, or is waiting for them to slip up and, you know, to catch them, how do you, you know, I mean, you did such a good job, so I guess I just want the blueprint. Like, how did you do it? But also, you know, for you, I don't know your names, I'm sorry, Osama. You know, how do you think about that and sort of what your children are up against, you know, in this moment in you know, in our country? I can give Mrs. Boundaoui this mic.
I said it deferred to my mom, but I mean, they are up against a very big challenge in general in this country, in the times that we live in general, but then in particular in the community that we live in. The challenge is very, very difficult, but I think there's definitely a silver lining to all this by the very things that Assia is doing right now, because it's interesting. In the beginning of the movie, I just noticed actually, you were talking to somebody from the Chicago Sun-Times, and they said, "Oh, our grandchildren will be filing a FOIA request," and I thought that was super interesting because actually, your very generation is doing it. So we've already skipped a couple, so we're, I think, ahead of the ball game. The challenge is great, but through the works that people like Assia is doing and others, we will rise to the challenge. But it is very difficult. No other way to put it.
Like Sama said, with their generation, it will be better than our generation. Because, everything is smooth for us. We don't know the rules, we don't know our rights, really. So maybe the generation of Assia, catch it better than us. And what they are doing now is the result of they know the rules, they know the rights, and maybe the generation of my kids, maybe they will be better. It's like we give something and they will take it and they will give it to their kids too. And it's a process. It will be, maybe, I wish it's like we say it, inshallah, it will be better. Each time, each generation will be better than whatever we did. It's just better, like education, better, about our rights and stuff like this. So,
I just wanted to say also, I think there is definitely a generational question in this film too, or in the issue itself. Like, our parents are immigrants, they came from countries where there was surveillance, where they were under oppressive regimes, and the way they reacted to surveillance in Algeria or their home countries was that they ducked their heads down, they stayed quiet about it, and they kept a low profile. When they came to the United States, and the same thing happened here, they reacted in the same way. People kind of internalized some shame about getting a visit from the FBI. You wouldn't tell your neighbors about it, you didn't talk openly about it, you ducked your head down and you stayed quiet. And I think it took a generation to say, I think maybe we're just more entitled to our Americanness in a way to say, no, that's not right. We know what our rights are, that shouldn't be happening. And in fact, like, ducking your head down might be the worst thing possible because secrecy emboldens surveillance. Surveillance gets its power from secrecy, from counting on people to be so afraid about it that they stay quiet and they keep the secret. And the thing that busts surveillance is busting that secrecy. And so it took, I think, another generation to say, no, we shouldn't be keeping this secret, and there's nothing to be ashamed about. We shouldn't be ashamed about this. For that maybe to change or to move it a little, So it's still there. There's still that feeling, and there's still this feeling of like keeping this open secret and whispering about it. But I think, we hope at least with the film that we're starting a conversation that, no, we can talk out loud about this. Like, driving while Black is an experience that is shared collectively among Black folk in this country. Being watched while Muslim is a collective experience almost every Muslim in this country feels, but doesn't talk out loud about. It's not a collective experience yet, and we're trying to say, like, it ought to be,
I just want to say that it strikes me because you were talking about the generational sort of question and the shame and sort of the paranoia that your parents' generation, was impacted by. But it strikes me because it seems like none of that applies in the case of your mother, and so you all are possible because of the mother that you have. So you just want to sort of acknowledge that. How? Why didn't it impact you? They worked so hard, right, to make you afraid and to make you silent. And you know, in the film, it comes across like you never bought into it. It never worked.
Yes, okay. I think as a human, everybody can be afraid. But, like one time, a young lady said, okay, I would be afraid, but I have to go on and move. I'm not gonna, to be afraid. The fear will not stop me to go ahead and do stuff. Because if you are afraid, just close your door and die. I mean, the feeling to be afraid, it's a human feeling, but it doesn't have to stop you to go ahead and ask for your right and you know, whatever you can do. It's, I think this is the thing I had, you know, in my heart. So I said, okay, go ahead and do whatever you can do. We can't just stop and close our mouth. It's just enough. That's it. You know, I had been decayed, and I think it's not just our community. It's all the what do you call it, the minorities. Yes, I think each minorities have the same problems, like African American or Japanese or you know, like Latinos. So go ahead. Of course we will be afraid, but go ahead, do it.
Mom,
That's
she's
it.
also asking about courage. Tell them about your grandma.
Yes.
That's
Yes, tell us about your grandma.
Sorry.
During French colonial times.
Yeah, because I was raised by my grandma, and she was living during the colonization of French people in Algeria. So, she was very, very courageous, because when she was telling us when the soldiers, the French soldiers, will come inside the house and they will start, you know, do many things, bad things, and break anything and look for people. And she would just, you know, like stand and said, "What are you doing? Why you do that to us? Why?" And she will be like one of her brother-in-law was scary cat. So she would go with him and stay with him until, you know, these soldiers will go away. And she's always saying this story until I said, "Oh, I wish I was in her generation and do something." Maybe I had this. She was my role model, you know, my grandma.
Yeah, so my mom, what she was talking about was alluding to a conversation we recently had in a room of all Muslim women, and we're talking about, you know, empowerment, and the conversation was about, so how do we talk about fear, right? Because we can't get to the empowerment before we address this very real human thing called fear. And where we went was, well, we have to redefine fear. Fear, you know, we have to redefine courage. So courage isn't the absence of fear, it's walking with your fear and despite your fear. It's an impossible idea to think of courage as an absence of fear, because none of us will ever be able to attain it. Fear is very real, it's very human, it's natural, and we all have and exists within us. So if we redefine courage to mean, okay, I accept that I have fear, but despite that fear, I'm going to move forward and move ahead. I'm going to walk with it, hold its hand and go and move forward. And I think that was, as Muslim women, that was really important for us to think about redefining courage. So yeah, we walk with fear and through fear and despite fear.
Assia, I actually want to sort of pivot a little bit, and the other thing that really struck me while watching the film is just, you know, something that I know in my head, but watching the film, it became very visceral. Just the absence of nuanced representations of Muslims and Arab Americans. You know, just I was kind of doing a mental scan of the images that I'm used to seeing, which they're all the very one-dimensional and very problematic images that I'm sure we're all used to seeing. So for you, you know, approaching this, making this film, this is an opportunity, you know, to sort of tackle representation. You know, how did you approach that process, right? Given the very sort of extreme dichotomies that you start with, right? Either it's the terrorist depiction or the Muslim that is helping American soldiers. That's the good Muslim, right? And there's nothing in between.
Well, I want to say that a lot of it had to do with also the team that I had on board, right? So my cinematographer is a Singaporean American woman, immigrant, Shu Ling Yong. Actually, she's right there behind the camera. And my editor is a Palestinian American woman. And it was very important that I didn't want to make a film to humanize us. And that was something we walked into it with, because if you need to watch a movie to see me or my community as human, there's a big problem to start with. You know. So the idea was we were making the film for us, and it was about representation, the fact that I'd never seen representation of us that was, you know, like the lack of representation in the media. And Junot Diaz actually says that if you really want to dehumanize a person, you deprive them of representation of themselves and culture. And in fact, in like pop culture, monsters never have reflections in mirrors. And there's a reason for that, you know, and that was the thing. So I wanted to create a representation that I would recognize, that, you know, something where I would see myself, that another young Muslim person watching this would be like, I see myself in this. So that was the starting point, not making it for someone to see us as human, but for us to see ourselves in all of our beauty and nuance and all of that, which is something that there's such a dearth of, and that was the starting point, I think. And yeah.
And for you all, for the family, now watching yourselves, what does this feel like? Watching yourself on the big screen.
I'm the youngest, by the way. So one thing that Assia was saying that I kind of resonate with is that she was saying that Usama's kids should definitely come to the premiere and fly out here because it's important for them to see themselves on screen, and that's like a norm now. You know, that like, oh, like I could be on a big screen. It's not just like, you know, it's not forbidden from like my kind of person. So like for them to just see themselves acting naturally, I think that's like really beneficial and impactful for them at that age. At least for me, I kind of, like everything that was happening in the community was kind of like myths, you know, like the van in the neighborhood, the FBI building, so like to see it like in real time and as something that like is very impactful for an audience, like this is just like normal, this was like a 4-year process, so we watched this and just now all, like the last 4 years is happening on screen. So it's like, it's impactful for me because it gives me the confidence that we can create something that's like that we resonate with really strongly, and that it will most likely resonate with a broader audience. So we have that ability to create as well. So that would be
Just to quickly add to what Sahih was saying, like for years we would, this didn't get into the film, but we would joke about this building in our neighborhood called the FBI building. And it was across the street of the school, so it's like, you call your friend, hey, where are you? I'm biking by the FBI building. Like, it was so normal, I promise. And
it's just like an industrial building.
yeah, it was just a very, like, plain industrial building, but I feel like this validates like that paranoia. Obviously, we know that it's real. Assia sued the FBI, and we have documents proving that it's real. So something that we joked about for years that seemed so normal, but is not normal for most people, is real, and it's like validated. Like, we were never paranoid. Like, when we walked up to strange cars asking why people were just in the neighborhood and who looked strange, that wasn't because we were crazy. It's because we knew something was off. So it feels good.
So I'm going to answer the question almost just directly, personally, about myself. I noticed when I watched the film that I felt like I was in a daze. And I think I was for a lot of when the camera was watching us in a daze. I'm an attorney myself, and I fight for other people's rights. And when the travel ban happened, a lot of attorneys in Chicago sort of banded together to create a support system for people affected by it. And I think when the camera was on us, I was almost feeling this really odd in between of like, I'm somebody that's built to fight for other people and advocate for other people, and I do that day in and day out as my job. And it was really odd to be in a position of vulnerability, and you're forced to think about what that sort of. I mean, I feel empowered, as an attorney and a Muslim female attorney, and then when the camera sort of turned on us, and we're reading these documents about, our house being seized, and that's why we had to move, because we thought we would be homeless, and it was disempowering, right? You suddenly feel like someone takes that away from you, and I think I oscillated between, feeling strong for other people, but then feeling weak for myself. And when I watch the film, I see myself in that daze, because I think that's what I was thinking about, and I think I still grapple with that. I still grapple with this, like, I can rise up to the challenge of fighting for someone else, but it's just so odd that for 30 years, we were the victims of something. It's really weird to see yourself on screen and realize like we were victimized, but then I go and fight for other people. It's just it was very odd, very odd sort of, I guess, another juxtaposition that I experienced in the film. So that's what I saw when I watched it.
Mrs. Boundaoui, how do you feel watching the film now on the big screen and with an audience?
I still feel it's not true. Is it true? Yeah, I mean, I think I felt like it's just a dream. Really, I said it this film, and we had all these events and FBI document and suing FBI, all this. I'm still in my dream, but it's true.
I actually want to go back to something that you mentioned when you were talking about different communities, African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans. In the film, you have a timeline of surveillance and sort of direct campaigns of attack against different communities of color. What should we take away from that? It seems like it was a very deliberate sort of placement of that timeline.
I really wanted to place this story within a historical continuum in this country. That this, in fact, that sometimes terrorism is framed as a very special crime that we have very special methods of dealing with, and I wanted to say that no, in fact, that this is not unique, that the targeting of communities of color that are dealing with politics that are not in line with U.S. foreign policy or U.S. alignment at the moment has happened since, for a century at least. And I also wanted to make the point that yes, we are all surveilled, but we are not all surveilled equally. That certain communities, that surveillance for certain communities means something different. It's not just about invasion of your privacy. Surveillance in certain communities means internment. It means deportation, it means assassination, it means imprisonment. And I wanted to make that point that, that while surveillance is an issue for all of us, that there are certain communities that are differently affected, and that this targeting and profiling, that maybe people at the end of the film still don't believe that this could happen, that our government could do something like this. And I wanted to say that even if you don't believe me, believe the history, that this is historical, that this has been happening. This will continue to happen unless we talk about it and do something about it, and that this is not in fact very unique, sadly.
No, it was really illuminating to sort of see it in that timeline, sort of fashion, that this is the way that our country has historically treated communities of color, across the board, and continues to do so. I also want to just ask about the FBI lawsuit and where things, are with that, and also just kind of note that that was huge, but you were so cool and calm and collected about it, it seems. Even like when you were freaking out, it still didn't seem like you were freaking out. Which is something that I do kind of want to, visit. I mean, it's such a monumental thing. Like me, Assia Boundaoui, I'm going to sue the FBI. Tell us about that.
It seems, okay, so it's part, like at a certain point in the Freedom of Information Act, you can appeal. It's part of the process. Basically, if they deny your appeal, the only thing you can do next is sue them or just drop it. And I didn't want to drop it. I had been working on it for years, and I'm like, no, we need these documents, especially when I knew there were 33,000. It just became even more alluring, and I felt like all of the bureaucracy was just to kind of deter me, like this is too hard. And I'm like, they mess with the wrong person, because I'm going to keep pushing it. And the more you tell me you have, the more I'm going to keep pushing for it. And knowing the 33,000, there was no way I could drop it. And so it was amazing. We got this law firm, Sidley Austin, here in New York to take us on pro bono, and they came on board. But yeah, it was an amazing moment, honestly, because it was a little bit of poetic justice just to see the plaintiff and the defendant flipped, because in most of these trials, it's, U.S. government versus Arab name, and this was like flipped, and, it was us versus the government, and a lot of people, and that was amazing. What was the first part of your question? I forgot. Yeah. So that was it. Oh, so what's happening with the case? So the film ends with the first delivery of the documents. Every month I get hundreds of pages. They have to process 3,500, but they actually end up giving me much less. They redact almost 70% of the pages, so I get something like 600 pages a month. So right now what we're fighting in court is these redactions. The fact that they've whited out so much of this information that ought to be in the public record. In fact, sometimes they white out newspaper articles that are public record, and this is very egregious. They're going too far. So, where the film ends is where my life is continuing. I mean, for the next few years, this is what I'm going to continue to do. What we want to do is create an online platform where we make all of these documents publicly available. And instead of just a document dump, we also want to pair them up with people's stories, anecdotal stories from communities across the country, with people's experiences about surveillance, but side by side. So this is not just about documents and data. This is actually you can see where it connects to how it's impacted people's lives. So that's kind of the next step in this journey, and MIT Open Documentary Lab is one of our partners in helping us with this impact campaign, and that's what we're doing next.
What's the name of the project?
It's called the Inverse Surveillance Project, and it takes various iterations. It's going to be this online platform. We've also done guerrilla projections. The idea is to disrupt secrecy, to disrupt the secrecy that shrouds government surveillance. So last week we projected some of these FBI documents with home videos on the NSA building downtown, and we're going to keep doing actions like that. So yeah, it's a project that takes many forms, and all my siblings are involved in one way or another.
So obviously this film is a labor of love, but it's also, it was a real mission. You're on a mission. What is your highest hope for what audiences take away from the film? Or, we're sitting here, we've watched the film, now what? Is there a call to action for audiences?
I mean, it might sound crazy and highly ambitious, but I want to end, government surveillance, like mass surveillance of people of color in this country, and shine a light on that. And I think the way to do that is there are a lot of people that had no idea this was even happening in Muslim communities, that are outraged that something like this is happening in the country right now and continues to happen. So one step is informing folks. The other step is really, specifically with Muslim communities and communities of color, is to encourage people to talk about their stories out loud. That I really think that there's a healing that comes from talking out loud about your story and sharing it. It's like, this didn't just happen to me, this happened to that person and that person and that person. And create that space to have that kind of a conversation, that it's okay, what happened to you was, it happened to a lot of people and it was wrong and it's not your fault, and let's talk about it openly and just create a conversation that's kind of been whispered about for decades, and start a conversation where people are talking out loud about this.
Thank you. I'm not sure how we are on time. Can we open up to the audience? Can we get word?
Yeah.
Yes? Audience, mi gente, where y'all at? Questions, comments, thoughts? Yes.
Hi there. How about that? First of all, Assia, I want to thank you. I want to thank you, one, for taking on this mission with such gusto, but I want to thank you too, and I'm going to try to get through this without getting teary-eyed, but I want to thank you for making a film that's a love letter to Britain. And one thing that you didn't show in your documentary is DJ Khaled's tweet of the knafe at an Aladdin restaurant. And I mentioned that to say that community of Bridgeview really built Bridgeview. It's one of the largest Muslim and Palestinian communities in the world. And as I'm watching this, I'm wondering the complicity of local officials and politicians. Were they aware? Was other leadership aware of what was going on in this community? And if you had any hints of that in the documents that you've come across or in your research. But I do just want to say thank you to all of you for this, because this is a document that I can give to my children and say, this is the community I grew up in, and these are people that I love and care about. Thank you.
Okay, the complicity of local officials. Okay, so when you start going down a rabbit hole and you start churning rocks over, be careful what you find underneath. And there were many things. This could be a series in terms of some of the things that I discovered. And certainly the mayor was complicit. The mayor of the city was in cahoots. Actually, the building of Toyota Park in Bridgeview had a lot to do with his relationship with the FBI. This is dirty on a lot of levels, and when you're talking about federal complicity, what was the local police doing at the time, and who knew what at certain times, and who allowed something like this to happen, and under whose watch. And so for a 90-minute film, it was hard to include a lot of it, and I was really intent on trying to point the finger at a system of power and not at individuals. And even Robert Wright, we really weighed with we don't want to make this a story about a bad apple. This is a system, and that he's such an obvious bad apple, it's so easy to kind of wipe it on him. But this is not just about him, it's about his superiors. It's people at FBI headquarters that approved this. It's people on a local level and power that approved this, and perhaps even local leadership within the Muslim community that might have been aware about some of this. So the idea was not to point a finger at one person, but certainly at a system of power, but certainly there were definitely local officials that were involved. As a journalist, I'm still writing about this, so I'm working on a investigative print piece that will address some of these things. But it's not done, I made lists and I'm not done. Yeah.
You're checking them twice. Yeah.
We have a hand here.
I'm a photography and video student here in New York, at School of Visual Arts. And I have two questions. The first thing, I make a lot of work on being Muslim American. I play my card really well at school. But people say my work is too optimistic, and I need to kind of expose the not so good part about being Muslim in America. And it's scary because what you were saying, you don't want to be the victim and you don't want to play that role. And so that really, like, I felt that. And I was thinking, so I was like, I need to, like, this, like,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
like, if that's that, then I need to work with you, and I need to work and just to do it.
Yeah.
It's the light and the dark, you know, like that there's not one way to show it. Like it could have been just a film that just focused on the negative, but it was really important to me to have those moments of joy. In the Eid prayer, the roller skating scene, even though I had to beg my sister to film her birthday party. But, you know, it's both of those things because even when you're under surveillance, it's not like, you know, like it's complicated. It's not like we're just like scared in our houses and crying all the time. Like there are definitely moments of joy. We joke about this stuff. There's a lot of dark humor, you know, about this, about the you know, they're like coping mechanisms that you use, and like humor is one of them, and just like forgetting about it and not talking about it and doing joyful things is one of them. So it's both, and I think that that's beautiful. That's beautiful that you're making work that is like optimistic and showing the beauty of American Muslims, because that's part of that truth too, you know. And it's both of those things, and I think we have capacity to hold both of those things at the same time, you know.
The scene with your mom and you're like crying on her lap. I think a lot of us can feel that. Like I don't live with my mom, so you know, and so like you guys really look really close and mashallah, that's amazing. But do you ever feel like you want to just like stop and like it's very hard?
Yeah.
And you want to give up, but you know you keep going. So like, do you have any advice for like people like me, people in the audience to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, you have good days and you have bad days, and there are like bad months, you know. I had bad months where it was just really difficult. Like when Robert Wright came, I like had a few months where I just didn't even want to work on anything anymore. It was just became really difficult to continue being creative and making the film. But I think, you know, like it's ups and downs, and you just like using the advice of my mom and Iman, like you walk with your fear. And you keep going, and you know, and some days you just got to sit down and lay down for a little bit, you know, and that's okay. That you just keep moving with it and you keep going with it. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yep, I have a hand over here.
You talked about publicity, about feeling vindicated, that these are some themes that have come up, and this idea that this could be a series, because in many ways you are still just scratching the surface. But you've also talked about people who were fearful and pulled out. So what has been the impact, I guess relatively early on, I don't know when, did the film just premiere just now?
Yesterday.
Okay. Well, I guess, have you seen any impact in your community of people maybe becoming less fearful, becoming perhaps more willing to talk to you? And is that going to be part of what you pursue going forward as you get these documents and kind of maybe go back to some of the people who pulled out and continue all of this, because there's so much more to be revealed?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, some of those people that were part of the film in the beginning and pulled out were in the audience yesterday watching the film, and they felt, I mean, that response was amazing. I mean, it was like, it made all of it worth it, was that they felt seen and validated on some levels, and that was really powerful. And I think that's it. That's why I think like talking about the stories out loud is powerful and healing, because seeing people in the community's reactions, specifically people who were investigated and you know, went to prison and dealt with it on a much more difficult level than anybody in our family did. Their response to it was very moving. Like to see that they felt validated by it was really amazing. And I think that's what encourages me more to say, like, we need to have these conversations out loud, because we validate each other in talking about it, and this film is helping to spark those conversations. And yes, I'm open to a series.
Any other hands? It's kind of hard to see. Right here in the middle.
Beautiful, beautiful. Just, so there's somebody sitting and redacting all this each month.
So how much does it cost for them how much are we paying for them to white out all this stuff? I mean, I feel like there's a campaign inside of that.
Did everyone hear the question? Yes.
Yeah, there's a whole bureaucracy. I think there's like more than one person whiting him out, but I've gotten really obsessed with who those people are, actually, because sometimes I get a lot of duplicates of the same document that are redacted differently. And in the last delivery, I saw my father's name unredacted in the file. And I've never seen a single name in the file. And I'm like, oh man, I just like created a whole story about who this person was. Like somebody took pity on me. And yeah, someone took pity on me. The same document, I have 16 versions of it. And one version is my father's name unredacted in it. And I was like, who, like The Lives of Others, I don't know if you've ever seen the film, but like, who are these people that are doing this and what do they think and what are their, and I've been really curious about that. That's another thing entirely. Yeah, there's a whole bureaucracy that does the redactions. There's a whole, Vulgar Betrayal cost millions of dollars. I was trying to get the exact ticket price. I really wanted to include that in the film, but it was impossible to know the real number. But I know they hired an accounting firm for $2 million to go through people's financial records. That they had 30 agents on the case at one point. That these actually took an enormous amount of taxpayer resources. And if you are worried about national security, and we're not saying don't be concerned about national security, you should be concerned that the FBI is pouring all of these resources in the wrong places. Like if you're looking for terrorists, this is not the place to look. You should in fact be putting those resources somewhere else. That this is an inefficient use of resources, and we should be concerned that the people that are charged with our national security are spending all of these resources profiling a mass net of law-abiding citizens.
And then what?
Yeah, and then whiting it all out.
And also that just seems cruel and deliberate that you saw your father's name, in a document that you have 16 other versions of. So I also just want to underscore, again, the toll, that this takes on you and, all of you here, and thank you again for doing the work. So we have time for about maybe two more. One here, and then we'll come up here.
Assia, are they still there? The FBI? Are they afraid now? Or are they even more emboldened? Or how are they reacting to all this?
I think they're very aware of what we're doing and what's going on in the community. And when we did the town hall, people were scared to come because they're like, there'll definitely be, informants or FBI agents in the town hall. And I was like, let them come. Let them be on notice that we are watching back, that we're taking records and we're taking notes, and we know what our rights are, and we know when they violate those rights. So let them come, So yeah, that's my position on it. I'm sure that they were aware of what we're doing, and people are still getting visits. We interviewed someone a month ago that told us that got visits after the raid that happened in the neighborhood. They're still visiting people that are undocumented. They're still visiting people specifically that have, their paperwork are not together. My mom said there's still cars on the street. So we still feel the presence. Yeah, it's not over.
And there was a hand somewhere here in the middle.
Congratulations on your successful lawsuit against the FBI. And like many people in the audience, I feel that this is just the beginning of the series. Like you end the movie with sort of the delivery, with the result. And now I myself am curious, despite the fact that 70% is redacted and you've only got 30% sort of to actually work with, could you give us a taste of, the next movie, as you would say, inshallah? What have you found out?
It seems, I mean, like the picture that we give in the end of the film is really it. It seems like, it's not like there are holes missing, but it's like a very blurry picture that becomes more and more clear, is how I see like the delivery of the documents. And the more details we get, the more we just understand about the tactics they use and all of that. But what we know about what's in the documents, I don't think at one point I realized there's not going to be one document that reveals everything. You know, that one, it wasn't like that. It was like a mass of documents, and together they make a picture clear. And that's sort of what it was. It was just, you know, a mass profiling of this community based on the religion, ethnicity, and they use these specific tactics on this community, and that they continue to do now. I think like, yeah, that I don't think there ever will be like one document that like totally shocks me. I mean, seeing my father's name shocked me a little bit, but it's just like a picture that becomes more and more clear. And what we, you know, I think there's certain things we'll never find out until the documents are completely unredacted. It takes about 40 years for all the national security provisions to expire, and then you can have like fully unredacted documents. So, and I think that there's a lot to glean from the investigations that happen to other communities. So I poured through the COINTELPRO, the FBI investigation of Black Power movement and Civil Rights movement in the 50s. And there's so much to glean from that. And in fact, it's something we talked about at MIT, creating like a machine learning program that helps us fill in the holes based on the documents that are completely unredacted from the past. That helps us understand what is in there. You know, they can make this information invisible, but there are other ways to understand it, you know, and we're going to continue to do that. And in 40 years, you know, you better believe, you know, you're requesting those documents.
So we have time for one more. Yes.
Did you or your family get any pushback from your own community? How did you
Yes, definitely. Particularly the community leadership. When I first started, they're like, you know, why are you airing the dirty laundry? Why are you focusing on negative things? Why don't you make a film about all the students that graduated from our Islamic school that went to Ivy Leagues? You know, like this was their idea. I think that there's like, at least in the community leadership, there's very much this like respectability politics. You know, that you know, like this model minority idea that we have to present ourselves in a certain way to be accepted. And I think like one of the things that got under my skin the most after 9/11 was our community leadership going on television and saying, we're not this, we're not terrorists, we're not this, we're not this, we're not this, constantly defining ourselves in the negative. And that drove me crazy. Like, if we're not this and we're not this and we're not this, then who exactly are we? Who are we? And I think like specifically in my family, and also because my mother is very unapologetic about certain things, like that this really bothered us, and this got under his skin to constantly define ourselves in the negative in this way, and to beg for a seat at the table, and to constantly be respectable and not push back against the government on certain things. And there is like that mentality, certainly. And I think, you know, like perhaps it's also an immigrant mentality too. Like it's a guest mentality, you know, like be happy where you are because you're lucky we're here, and don't shake the boat too much because they might kick us out. You know, and you can't blame a certain generation for thinking that way on a certain level either. And I think like we have a sense of entitlement, like we're not going anywhere. We're, you know, this is home, this is who we are, and we don't mind shaking the boat on a certain level.
I would say another way to sort of think about what pushback there was is that there's sort of a natural chilling effect that happens. So, you know, one of the sort of direct effects of surveillance is that it silences people. And from a civil rights perspective, you can think of that and say, well, that's a constitutional violation by the government, right? When the FBI uses certain tactics to surveil people, it creates a chilling effect, so people don't want to come out and share their stories or identify as Muslim, or you know, so. And that was a very real thing when Assia started making the film. You know, like she alluded to earlier, There were people who had some really, serious sort of run-ins with the FBI, and that shook them up. And they were afraid to talk about it, and they were afraid to come out and share their story. And that's the chilling effect. That's exactly almost the purpose. I mean, we talk about, well, maybe that's exactly why they do it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the reason, and my mom says this in the film, that maybe that's exactly what they want. Like, the surveillance isn't about finding something, it's about creating a chilling effect. And we encountered that, Assia encountered that when she went and approached community members about sharing their stories, and so that's very real. But that's a very natural thing that happened, so.
I think we're at time, so I just want to thank the Boundaoui family again. Thank you all for coming, supporting, and being in conversation with us tonight.